All right, hello and welcome to our presentation on insights into undergraduate pathways using course load analytics. My name is Conrad Borchers and I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. And this is work in collaboration with Professor Zachary Pardos from UC Berkeley, who will now give you a primer on the motivation and context of our work.
Thanks, Conrad. So I'm just going to briefly set the stage for the work here. This is what a UC Berkeley student would see when they're perusing their course catalog for a course, and it's not unlike what any student at any institution would see looking for a course. What I want to draw your attention to is the units here. It says units 4, synonymous with credit hours. And in America, students have almost full reign over the selection of how many courses and which courses they'll take in any given semester. And there's a wide range of restrictions on minimum and maximums that they can take. And so they often consult information like this when choosing the courses to take. The issue with that is credit hours is not correlated with workload. So that would be a poor metric to use, and it's the only quantitative metric an institution provides students to estimate workload. Only 6% of the variance of student perceived course loads captured by credit hours, as opposed to 36% of course load is captured by LMS features. And here's an example of two courses that a student may weigh, History 130 and History 133A. Both of those satisfy a college requirement, which is American histories, but they both have the same credit hours. Are they going to be the same amount of workload? A student wouldn't be sure in this case. So more accurate analytics about workload could aid our understanding of longer term outcomes like stop out, on-time graduation. So the idea of this work is train a novel machine learning algorithm to predict workload based on the ground truth of students rating the workload of courses they've taken, and then use that novel trained predictive model of course load analytics, which we coined that CLA, to then retrospectively look at student course load semesters for 4 years and see if any interesting insights elevate through this new lens of course load analytics besides credit hours. So I'll kick it back to Conrad now and get out of the way.
Thank you, Zach. So before we embarked on this journey of developing these new analytics, we of course surveyed literature that demonstrates the importance of workload in higher education more broadly. And what comes to mind immediately is that a lot of previous works that have focused on using workload for academic outcome prediction have been largely operating on a time-based definition to workload, such as credit hours as well. For example, an estimated number of hours per week that students are expected to spend on a course. However, other studies have looked at workload a bit more broadly. For example, students cutting into their leisure time to deal with high course load during the semester. And other works have also leveraged surveys and other psychological constructs to look at the detrimental effects of higher education workload when consumed at an excessive amount. So for example, one study linked it to negative well-being. And another range of literature that we build upon is nascent applications of institutional enrollment data to essentially improve upon and learn more about academic outcome prediction. So for example, there's grade distribution and prediction work that has leveraged hidden Markov models and graph convolutional networks, but also these enrollment data have been used for student-facing applications, such as work stemming from Zach's lab on goal-based course recommendation in academic planning settings. But also the Carter project, for example, has used enrollment data such as grade distributions to develop student-facing analytics that make it easier for students effectively to choose among courses and to get perhaps a better sense of the workload or the difficulty of a course beyond credit hours. But what CLA is really extending on here and introducing is this idea of leveraging this psychological construct of workload in a more granular and maybe more multifaceted way to essentially better understand but also improve upon academic outcome prediction and potentially inform student-facing applications. So I will take you a little bit on a journey of how we methodologically derived course load analytics in our context. So it starts obviously with a definition of how we define workload and how we surveyed students to obtain ground truth labels. but then also feature engineering, which is interestingly enough similar to the previous presentation based on LMS data, but also enrollments, and then using machine learning to essentially come up with analytics. So what we did, and what is also extensively described in our Internet and Higher Education journal paper, is that we essentially adapted a routinely used survey on workload from prior psychology research called the SWOT survey from Reid and Nigren, and essentially adapted its wording to the higher education context. And what's interesting about this survey is that it has two additional workload dimensions next to time load, which is in our case the weekly time spent on the course, but then also additionally introducing mental effort as the concentration and attention required for course completion, but then interestingly enough also psychological stress, which we described in the survey as the confusion, frustration and anxiety during course completion. We essentially had 2 items per subconstruct and also established sufficient reliability among them. So to recap, we had a total sample of 332 ground truth course load ratings from a survey of UC Berkeley undergraduates in the spring 21 semester. And then we also leveraged the LMS records of the same semester that was rated during these surveys and engineered features from Canvas LMS such as assignment-based features such as the number of assignments, but also when they were available, with the idea, for example, that assignments that are available earlier are easier to navigate for students. But then also we leverage prior work from Zach's labs on essentially deriving semantic vector representations of courses, which are analogously trained to word embeddings in natural language. So you essentially take course sequences in order to essentially encode the sequences in which students took courses, which may help in predicting these course load labels. And then we also survey and create more general enrollment level features such as grade distributions, STEM status, and credit hour designations. So in the next step of the validation of our new analytic, we have performed a 2-step validation process of using a range of readily available but also reproducible model architectures from machine learning, and essentially tuned the hyperparameters of them through random search on a cross-validation training set. And then after using and tuning these models, then we validate a selection of final models on a holdout test set in order to reduce essentially the search space. And I'm going to present you the accuracy of this holdout test set validation next, which is essentially a selection of viable models we derived. And you can see on the left side, first we break it out by different course load constructs. One thing that is notable here first is that we had combined course load as an additional prediction task, which is essentially a simple average of the 3 course load sub-construct dimensions. And what you can see here already is that the model that we end up choosing in bold is an ensemble prediction for this combined course load task, with an improvement compared to a mean prediction baseline of around 22%. And what's also noteworthy in this slide is that only using the time load based prediction task did not yield a significant improvement to baseline according to bootstrap confidence intervals. So it kind of goes to show that this time-based lens on course load is also limited. So we now have the course load analytic, which we now subsequently define as this combined course load prediction of our ensemble models. And now what we do next in this paper is deriving the insights promised in the title. We essentially look at the full cohort of undergraduate students at UC Berkeley that entered the university in 2017 and scale essentially the course load of these students retrospectively. So we look at student course semester pairs of around 60,000 and then essentially look at how an undergrad career or pathway progresses. So essentially looking at course load over time as a function of the semester. So we introduce, similar to institutional analytics of semester credit hour load, a PCL-SEM metric, the predicted course load from CLA per student per semester, as a simple sum of this combined course load prediction I introduced. And then what we do is we compare it to the credit hour distribution across semesters and make novel insights by relating it both to the STEM status of the student major, could kind of glean the robustness of the inference across these 2 domain types, but also related to the stop out and the on-time graduation of students, as we can also glean that from the enrollment records. What now follows is essentially curated set of highlighted insights from our study, so noteworthy results, and we are happily pointing you to the remaining results in our paper. But for now, let me highlight, for example, this trajectory of course load in general. So in this graph, you have on the x-axis the semester count of students, so first to 8th semester, a 4-year degree. And then on the y-axis, we first have the credit hour load of students, so the traditional metric offered by institutions. And what we have circled here in red is, interestingly enough, the first semester of students, according to credit hours, is their lowest, the second lowest. There's the 8th semester, of course, which is both the case for STEM and non-STEM students. But now, if we do the very same analysis with our course load analytic metric, there's an interesting observation to be made, which is in the first semester, according to CLA, actually this first semester is among the highest course load semester, which is actually the highest one in the STEM student case and the second highest in the non-STEM student case. So you notice there's a little bit of a discrepancy here between course load level and predicted course load analytics in terms of first semester course load. And we ask ourselves essentially, what does this discrepancy constitute and what can we learn from this discrepancy? So we introduced essentially a normalized difference between both credit hour and predicted load. And then we looked at what features in our model explain this difference. And what is very notable is that prerequisite-based features alone explain around 30% of this discrepancy. And then we did also some qualitative investigations in the paper, filtering the highest course load discrepancy courses, and found, for example, that the student-to-instructor ratio was remarkably smaller in these high discrepant courses, partially in part because of them being usually situated within the music department. And another interesting observation was that STEM courses generally had a higher discrepancy to credit hours. And we do some linear modeling in the paper that also indicates early evidence for that discrepancy playing a role in off-time graduation of students. So what are some limitations and future works for these insights and applications? So first of all, we note that while introducing this novel concept of course load analytics, we've kind of limited our analysis to a course-by-course and semester-level analysis. So there's definitely room for investigating different trajectories, and also prior literature suggests that course load within the semester might be worth looking into. For example, on prior work on procrastination indicates that it might be an interesting venue, because some students essentially tend to procrastinate more and more throughout the semester, also affecting workload. So surveying students throughout the semesters on a weekly basis might be an interesting way moving forward, as there might be also overlapping spikes in workload across courses that might explain some of the adverse academic outcomes we're predicting. Then secondly, we acknowledge that our current operationalization of course load in higher ed can definitely be reflected upon and perhaps improved by, on the one hand, taking into account more contextual factors of students' academic experience, such as off-campus employment, which might relate to workload, while also perhaps considering how, in what other ways the SWOT survey or course load surveys can be adapted to the higher education context, perhaps integrating more facets of workload. So future work then is, on the one hand, of course, the question of how effective can course load analytics be in future interventions, for example, in academic advising settings, but also course recommendation settings, or as an additional data point for students' course selections in course catalogs. So that's definitely an interesting point to investigate next. But also, it might not be student-facing applications, but also institutional changes that might be informed by course load analytics, such as a curricular redesign according to the question of how the distribution of workload should look like, for example, considering the freshman experience that we highlighted in our results. And then another interesting question is to what degree course load and course load analytics should be analyzed at the level of individual students or courses, so how individualized predictions should be, as we currently assume that course load analytics are constant across students. And that's also an interesting topic of future work and of future engineering in general. So to highlight and summarize the contributions of our work, we established an initial baseline of this novel prediction task of course load analytics, with around a 22% improvement, particularly by extending course load to the dimensions of mental effort and psychological stress. And then we retrospectively scaled these predictions to historical enrollments and found interesting findings regarding discrepancies or underestimations of workload compared to credit hours, particularly in students' first semester, which might be indicative of graduation delays and can be summarized or is particularly associated with STEM courses and course prerequisites. Here are our references, and I thank you very much for joining this session today. Here are our emails, and we also have a paper and code link with reproducible code. Thank you.